Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS. And today I'm going to give you my third entry in my IMDB's greatest films of all time list. And this one was actually from an option of three, which I detailed in my community post. The other two were The Usual Suspects and High and Low, the Akira Kurosawa crime noir film. And The Usual Suspects and Come and See were at a 50-50 split, which means I have to do both. But I wanted to do Come and See first because this film is brutal. This film will definitely make you feel very queasy in regards to how this film depicts war and the suffering of various different people throughout the Second World War, especially in Russia, which is where this film takes place. But what this film does very interestingly is it essentially takes the war storyline and essentially creates this very interesting narrative where you follow this young man by the name of Florin, and he is a teenager who has been drafted into the Second World War Army at a very young age. I think he was about 13, 14 years old, and he effectively is thrown into this conflict knowing that he will potentially die. He will never see another age, but he goes into it willingly because he believes that at first he believes it's going to be fun. He believes it's going to be very exciting. He's going to be very heroic. He's going to be remembered in the history books, and he's going to be, get to see some action, and he's very excited, like a lot of boys his age would be. But then very slowly it begins to dawn on Florin as the story goes on. And the second he goes into that war camp and the soldiers take him away, and his mother is begging for them to not take him away and to keep him here to look after us all, he immediately understands that this is not a game, and what happens when you essentially are in a war and you essentially give away your heart to hatred and you give away your heart to, all these horrible demands, I suppose. What is left for innocence? And it's a very compelling narrative. And this film was effectively written by a man who was basing a lot of the film on his own experiences. And what he did with this screenplay was he wanted to basically show what he had witnessed. Excuse me. So effectively, Florin's character is essentially a self-insert of the author of this screenplay, who wanted to basically telegraph his own experiences of what he saw during the Second World War in Russia at that time. And it is a very powerful portrait. It's probably one of the most powerful war films that you've probably never seen, because if you have seen the film or if you have heard about the film, you've seen the poster, you've seen, the blonde haired, Florin looking into the camera, looking melancholy at you, right back at you, or sometimes in certain cases of the poster it's always been in silhouette where you've sort of like seen his face like looking very melancholy at you through the poster kind of thing. It's a very powerful image, and that image haunts the film because Florin's face, the actor who plays Florin, his face is everywhere on this film. When you see him in close up, it really does show a degree of progression where you do see him as sort of like this bright, plucky faced, teenager who's very excited to go to war. But then immediately, as the film goes on, you begin to see him, become very traumatized, very saddened, and very almost like angry as well that this war was allowed to happen. And it's a really beautiful, it's not beautiful, but it is a very kind of gradual and almost very poetic and very kind of beautiful transformation of this character from being this very kind of arrogant teenage boy to being this very world weary and this very wise beyond his years kind of teenage boy who now has experienced war. He's experienced the hardships. And I really like that because at the start of this film, he is very arrogant. He's very excited about going off to war. He's got his rifle ready. He digs the rifle out of the sand with him and his friend. And then he starts, play around with it and pretend to, fire things. His mother's distraught and says, well, if you plan on going to war and you're excited by the prospect of killing, why don't you pick up that rifle right now and kill me and your sisters right here in this room? And the sisters are just giggling. They kind of think to themselves, oh, it's really funny. Isn't, Mummy acting silly? And Florin, has this look on his face where he, looks at his sisters and he smiles and he winks at them. And he says, look, I'm going to tease Mummy right now with this rifle and things like that. And it's very humorous or slightly amusing because you do sort of see that he is being a bit of a boy, he's being a bit of a lad, but then at the same time you are also very almost kind of shaking your head in disapproval, thinking to yourself, he's so arrogant and so, full of himself, and he thinks he knows everything, but in reality he only knows half the story. And as the film goes on, you begin to realise that he is completely out of his depth and he doesn't know what he's doing. And what I really love about this film, and it all sort of came together for me in one scene, where he's fallen in love with a girl and he takes her back to the forest path. They get separated through gunfire and conflict, but they come back together again when they're crossing like a moat, like a really kind of tar-driven moat. And they struggle through it, but then when they come back, they're on dry land and they're walking through the forest and they're very safe and they're very relaxed and they're very calm. But then he finds his old house and he's very excited and he's like going, oh my god, we're back at my old house. My mum will be so happy to see us and that we're alive and that we're well. And he goes into the house, he brings this girl with him into the house and they sit down by the fire. And he says, oh, they've got rabbit stew out, my favourite. And he serves up one bit of the stew for himself. He serves up a bit of the stew for his companion. But then he sits down and he immediately, is very comforted by it. He immediately, starts to snip it and he starts to eat it as if it's normal. But his companion is actually looking at it and going, oh, this doesn't smell right. And she tastes a bit of it, like she puts a bit of it in her mouth. And immediately she vomits. And that just kind of goes to show that Florin is one of these people who has now become so broken by the war this early on that he literally is he's literally crying out, grasping for any kind of element of the familiarity of his childhood, the familiarity of his innocence, that he literally will eat gone off stew or raw stew so that he can, ignite some of those childhood memories. And it's actually really kind of beautiful, but it's also really tragic as well, because you really do see that he literally has become broken this early on in the film. He's become this broken by this conflict that he literally cannot stomach the fact, literally, that he is now in the thick of this war, and the fact that he goes off to war, and that's almost like a metaphor for him, crossing the threshold between innocence and experience, as William Blake would call it. The idea of him basically, becoming a man through the act of fighting in this war. It's such a very powerful metaphor, and it's really well. It articulates that point very well. But this film is quite brutal. There's a lot of sequences in this where just me describing it would make a lot of people feel queasy, because there's a lot of moments in this that does make you feel kind of like even describing the bit with the stew, it made me kind of feel like a bit, I'm not really sure I should be describing this. But it's a really well crafted film in that regard, because it does take you on a bit of a journey with this character of Florin. He starts off as very simple, this very arrogant child, but then he becomes this horrible, this sort of, war-hardened soldier. But he is also very traumatized, and what's very wonderful about this film, how it depicts these very, well, not wonderful, but how it depicts these very horrific scenes, is the director did a very good job of really kind of focusing on Florin, but at the same time, it is through his perspective, and you do see a lot of other very creepy and almost surreal sequences. Like, there's this moment in the film where he goes to this settlement, and he has just found out that his sister and his mother have died, and he breaks down. He literally breaks down crying, and his relatives and his neighbours are literally saying to them, don't cry, don't break down, you've got to be strong. And it's really horrible, because he has no choice but to break down. He has nothing left. And when he basically regains his composure, he sees that the villagers have taken this Nazi's uniform and they've essentially, put clay and a hat on this this strange figure, and they've made this figure look like Adolf Hitler, and they've basically paraded him around, and they're like touching the image of this Nazi general. They've literally tried to destroy the image of this general that they've made out of clay, and it's a very striking image. It's very haunting as well, and this film is just really great with the imagery and how it manages to create a almost disturbing mood with the way it photographs certain things, like just them touching the uniform of the Nazi and trying to push him away, and trying to show that they're taking back control by harassing this model they've created out of clay, is them kind of seizing back control, Belarus or Russia taking back control from the Nazis, but it's futile because it's just a dream according to them, until it actually happens. But what's really well done about this film is it manages to really just kind of show how far people are willing to go to just really see that they can get back control from this oppressive power. And this is based on reality, because Russia was one of the settlements, one of the countries that the Nazis were heavily against in regards to how they viewed their society, their practices, and all the rest of it. Because Adolf Hitler, back in the Second World War, was obsessed with creating a new and improved world for Germany, and he was most specifically obsessed with trying to find the master race, trying to create a master race. So he would go after people who were inferior to him, gay men, the Jews, the Russians, and all the rest of it. All these different people who he didn't seem to think were, of noble blood or of worthy blood for his master race plan, and he essentially went after them and exterminated them effectively, treated them like cattle, treated them worse than animals. And Russia was pretty much in that same category for Adolf Hitler. So this entire story basically is a story that actually did take place, and it was about the atrocities of those particular things. But there are often a lot of things in this as well that does feel very dark and very, brutal. Like, there's a very horrific scene in this film where you essentially see Florin being taken by Nazi generals into this camp where he's basically shut up with the rest of these family members or the rest of these people with children in this barn. And the Nazi general says, if you have children, you cannot leave. And if you surrender your children, you can leave. If you surrender your children, you leave your children behind. We will essentially let the parents go, but the children can stay, and we will burn the barn. But what's very interesting is that even though the children are being given up, they're essentially throwing them back into the barn, and they set it alight. It's such a horrific sequence, and it just goes to show that this film has such powerful moments in it, which really do stay in the memory, and it really does make you think. This is just a really horrible example of just how brutal the Nazis were. And what I really think is important is that innocence is just tarnished in this film. Like, the whole entire idea of innocence, and the idea of, innocence and war kind of not joining hand in hand almost, is such an interesting idea to me. And I think this film does a very good job of really kind of articulating that, with the burning of the family members and the children, particularly in the barn scene. It does a very good job of really kind of highlighting that, but that's not necessarily an articulation of a theme. It's the articulation of what actually happened factually in Russia during the Second World War, what the Nazis actually carried out during those times. So it is often based on fact, even though I could praise it from a storytelling perspective. It is also something that actually happened. But what's very fascinating about this film is it does also do something really kind of clever with the idea of what would happen if you got the opportunity to go back in time, and you were to go all the way back and track down a baby version of Hitler, and you got the opportunity to stop the activities of the Second World War. What would you do? Would you kill this innocent child, or would you let it live, and would you let it grow up knowing that one day that child will become Hitler? And it's done so wonderfully in this film that the way Florin at the end, spoiler alert, basically finds a picture of Hitler, and he tries to basically fire at the picture with his rifle, his trusted rifle that he's carried with him since the very first scene in the film. So it's been with him throughout the duration of this film, this rifle that he's had, that he's literally dug up from the dirt. It basically, allows him to, finally reconcile the fact that he just doesn't have it in him to be a proper soldier, or do sort of things that soldiers sometimes are, asked to do, which is sometimes to murder the innocent in favour of duty or in favour of following orders, and that's just something that he will never do, and that's something that he really does very well articulate on his face. Like when he is shooting the picture, it rewinds to all the previous periods of history where Adolf Hitler thrived from a political standpoint, and essentially, just amassed in power and created the Nazi Party and made all these very persuasive speeches to the German people. And then it goes all the way back to his youth. It goes all the way back to him, learning how to walk and things like that, and learning how to read and write. And then it goes all the way back to him in a picture form with his mother as a baby. And Florin is literally, heartbroken that someone so evil who created this mess, this atrocity, started out as someone so innocent, so bright-eyed and so hopeful and so optimistic for the future, could become such a horrible tyrant. And that breaks him in a way. That breaks him that literally, like everybody else, we all started off as children and we all have the potential to either be good or evil. And it's such a fascinating ending, and this film is literally worth it just for the ending alone. But I feel like in order to get there, you need to see the film from its beginning to its ending. And it's just a fantastic piece of cinema. It's a fantastic piece of Russian cinema. And I feel like this film deserves to be seen and deserves to be rewatched by multiple generations, because it basically documents through the medium of cinema a very important period in history which should never be forgotten, and which is the atrocities of the Second World War and what actually happened there, and we should never repeat it. And it is something that often people tend to forget. That often people say, why do we look at history? Why do we look at the past? Well, we look at the past to learn from the past so that we can have a better future. That is why we look at the past. That's why the past is so important to look at time and time again, so that we can learn from it and have a better future for our families. That is why, and that's why Come and See is just as much a vital piece of wartime cinema as much as anything else, because it does depict the importance of what it means to hold innocence and hold value in human life, even when the cause seems too great. Because what's interesting in this film is, after its most famous scene, the barn scene, a lot of Russian generals come in almost as the cavalry. They come in and they essentially capture the Nazis, they rescue Florin, and they essentially gather some of the Nazi generals that they've managed to capture, and they essentially put them up against the wall and they threaten to shoot them and give them a taste of their own medicine. And Florin in this scene is very interesting, because he has his rifle there ready to commit horrible murders. Like he's ready to actually, empty his rifle into a few German soldiers, but he doesn't. He continues to look at them and study their faces and see whether or not he is actually capable of actually doing this, actually capable of taking these lives. But he doesn't have it in him. Someone else does, though. But before that, one of the soldiers actually says, I was just following orders. I wasn't meant to be here. I wasn't meant to be a soldier. I was just following orders to make my family proud. And that was something that they did. Like, a lot of Nazi soldiers did often say back in World War II that they were just following orders, that this was just something that they did and they had no choice in the matter. But really, they were just cold-hearted bastards who really just didn't want to acknowledge any responsibility. And that's the horrific reality, is sometimes evil people don't want to admit that they've done evil things or see what they've done as genuinely evil. They want to just sort of hide behind, oh, I was just following orders. Oh, this was just someone else's plan. This wasn't mine. And they'll make up any old excuses they can at the time. But when they do get shot, it shocks even Florin that someone from the Russian army had actually just killed these men in cold blood. But he justifies it to himself that they killed our innocents, so they should get a taste of their own medicine. And it's such a really well done scene, because the actor who plays Florin, I can't remember his name, but I really do want to look it up. And let me know in the comments what the actor who played Florin's name is, please, the main character in Come and See, because he's such a good actor, and it's actually kind of it's actually kind of shocking that his face is all over this film, but he never got the attention of other, Hollywood or even other filmmakers outside of Russia to pick him up and say, we want to have you in more films, because he's such a good dramatic actor. And he does the impossible, which is he's able to really kind of reflect an entire spectrum of emotions with just a single look. And when he literally looks into the camera at you during this film and during his scenes, you really do feel the spectrum of sadness, regret, fear and trauma, on top of the idea that he literally is in a do or die situation. He has to do something to survive, or he has to kill or be killed. And that's just such an incredible thing that he plays with in this film, that he manages to convey throughout his performance. And it's so well done. So, this is my review for the 1984 film Come and See. And I want to know in the comments, what did you think of this film? Did you think it an enlightening film, or did you think it was just sort of something that just sort of articulated something that was already told very well in tons of other war films? What was your thoughts on this film? Whatever your thoughts are, comment below and be sure to let me know. And next time, hopefully when I do another one of these IMDb films, I will be covering The Usual Suspects. But I wanted to do this one first. And I want to give a special thank you to Christian of Canto 1408 for actually selecting this film as part of the IMDb Greatest Films of All Time list. It was at number 90. And I hope you guys like this video. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more, please like, share and subscribe. And click right on the notification bell to see more. I hope you're all having a very good day. This is Joshua WHIMS. Take care. Bye for now.